What we're moving more towards and shifting to is this more about holistic approach, the whole child, and then the multiple data points, not just about a singular test score, but also about their emotional intelligence, about their critical thinking skills, about their ability to navigate challenging circumstances, about their ability to work together in a team.
You're listening to School District Superheroes, a podcast that puts the super back in superintendents. In each episode, you'll learn how today's most innovative superintendents are reimagining what's possible for students, staff, and their communities. And now for your host, Nick Telford.
Well, welcome Bruce Bivins to School District Superheroes, the podcast highlighting the super in superintendent. I'm your host, Nick Telford. So today I'm joined by the wonderful Bruce Bivins, one of the most driven, genuine, and intelligent people that I have had the pleasure to come across in my time in education. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Bruce. My middle name is Bruce. I don't know if I knew that.
I did not know that.
There you go. Yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So first question, just to kick things off, who was your favorite superhero growing up?
Oh, favorite superhero. I was a Spidey kind of guy. So Spider-Man was a big fan for me. I was a climber. I climbed trees like you wouldn't believe. There was a tree by my elementary school that, for me, I thought it towered 100 feet. It was one of those ones where there was branches all over the place, so I felt very safe. But I would climb that every morning as I waited for the gates to open.
That's true to form. I can't say I'm too surprised by that, Bruce, to be honest with you. When you think of superheroes, is there any traits about superheroes that, resonates with you?
I think superheroes are selfless in the acts of their being super, right? And also focusing on supporting some of the most vulnerable. And I think that plays out well in why I entered in education. And also all the folks in education are superheroes on how each and every day supporting our kids and families in really meaningful, life-changing ways.
That's a great description, I think, of what real superheroism is, and not necessarily leading with some brash confidence, but more supporting and being there to guide and support the vulnerable and the ones that need it most. So I think it's a great way to kick things off. You just talked about your path to education. If you wouldn't mind giving us a brief history of the youth of Bruce Bivins, what shaped you and how did you end up really on a path and a trajectory to the highest place you can get in public education as a superintendent?
That's a nice way to start, Nick. Thanks. Kind of going back helps me think about not just why I entered this journey, but what were the influences along the way.
Yeah,
I think being adopted at first in a family where all my brothers and sisters we were all adopted from multiple families. And I think being in a household where no one is blood related, but we're all connected in this service to one another, and having love being the driver and creating a family community in that way. And then at the same time, when you learn what that actually means, and I think for me, intrinsically, I took within myself this need for acceptance, belonging, and that really drove, I think, a lot about my experiences growing up in whether it's school or sports or my friends, and always wanting to seek relational trust and build team. My parents were really active in the community, so they were great role models for servant and leadership in both the church and in the community, and in the nonprofit world as well. They supported the community in that manner as well. So I think those were really great role models for me. Then I went into camp counseling, YMCA, spent time on excursions and taking kids outdoors. And that outdoor education and coaching were like the first indicators that I really enjoyed that part of my life. And it didn't hit me until a little bit later that that was the right direction to go. My friend said, all you ever talk about is your time when you get to coach youth or you get to be with youth. You'd be a great teacher. And then the light bulb went on for me. And I went down that path. And I think that idea of superhero with supporting the most vulnerable played itself out because my credentials were focused on special ed, ESL. That led me into working in a group home to start with displaced foster care youth. And during that time of my teaching career, I really learned about my need to serve the greater good. And then I went back to school and started to work towards my administrative credentials. Then I went into special ed and started to teach in, back then they called them self-contained classrooms where you had the same students all day. I tried to really push for inclusion back then. And there was a lot of resistance in the 90s for inclusion. So that was my first push, like how systems were not set up for all kids. At the time, largest high school in Seattle, 8 out of the last 10 years, the principal had changed. So it was a little bit of Lord of the Flies. And we did some really amazing transformational work there at Franklin High School. And then I had the wonderful opportunity to be the principal and then West Seattle High School. And then I moved down to LA and did the principal work there at Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights. We did some really beautiful transformational work there as well, as a community really coming together for kids. And then I moved down to San Diego and did the assistant superintendent work for 8 years, where again, we were a leading district among the nation at the time for really moving the work in meaningful ways for kids, especially the ones, again, most marginalized, most vulnerable, families most in need, and showing the biggest growths for urban districts across the nation, which then led me to the superintendency where I'm here now in Perris at my 3rd year. And I just, this is my 30th year and just loving education every day. I'm passionate about the work, and it's not work for me. It's a joy.
Thanks for sharing all that, Bruce. Really appreciate you going back to the very, very start. And I think, there's probably so much formative things taking place back then in your early days that pushed you in this trajectory. I'm always interested in people. You hear that sometimes if you're struggling in your 20s to figure out what you should do, I've heard before, ask a friend what they think you should do. And so it's interesting that actually played out in real life for you, because sometimes we're, looking inward so much, so like, it's so obvious where your talents are, where your heart is at. And so the fact you listen to that, a lot of people I'm sure don't listen to that, but I think that was a good friend you had.
Thank you.
You obviously went, you built yourself up. Like, you haven't taken the quick path to being a superintendent. You've, it sounds like you've taken on the hardest of jobs to learn the hardest way possible, which probably forms a really strong backbone in you as a superintendent. I'm wondering, what were those lessons that you have learned over your time, from working with the adjudicated system through to turning around or continue to turn around schools in San Diego? Is there any particular lessons from a leadership standpoint that you've taken from all your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many lessons along the journey of leadership and learning by failure and by struggle and strife at times, because I didn't have the right role models in the beginning. But learning by doing, and then also, I think, being quick to shift a disposition is really important. I think the shift to humility, really important. Staying curious around problems, leading by modeling, and leading by building trust. And I think that's what inspires folks, is if you can create cultures where we know our sense of purpose and we can be vulnerable in those spaces, because ultimately our systems of schooling are based on the relationships that are built and the hearts and minds within each of the adults about how they believe about their own capacity and how they believe in each other and how they are in alignment and belief in the mission and vision of what we're trying to achieve. And if we don't set up opportunities for them to connect with one another, to stay in a curious wonderment space in times of challenge, to have the agency to lead on their own and go through processes of self-discovery and self-reflection. It's really hard to build. Stephen Covey talks a lot about this shift of command and control type of positional leadership. When I first got into leadership, there was a lot of superintendents that were being hired through the military mindset of command and control. No Child Left Behind also in the early 2000s reinforced this idea of compliance and efficacy through an implementation that had to be compliant and coherent. What we lost in that struggle was the ability for folks, teachers, staff, instructional aides, leaders to really think on their own and to build something that is more in alignment and in need of the context of the community they are in, and then allowing those folks to be the architects of that development themselves. So the North Star can stay the same on what we're trying to achieve, but the how we go about it needs to be differentiated based on the needs of a community. And each community is in a different place and space and time in their own evolutionary growth and development. So tapping into that understanding of where folks are at is really important. So what you have to do is that you only can change and move at the speed of how much trust is in the bank within an organization. And if folks feel that their expertise is valued, then they move with commitment. And I think also you have to, it's kind of like that you go slow to go fast, right? You got to spend a lot of time listening before you are even talking yourself within a positional authority stance, because you want to understand on the ground what the experience is before you start pitching ideas or you start trying to coalesce a strategy into action for initiative change. So it's really about you got to go with how the readiness of folks, the willingness, and at the same time, you got to be courageous enough to speak up about, not being okay with status quo when status quo doesn't mean all kids get what they need.
How have you found that in a practical sense when you're leading teams, let's say in Perris or in San Diego? How have you found adopting those principles to lead the teams that you're leading? How has that been going?
Yeah, I mean, every team has a different dynamic. And what you're trying to do, and John Hattie talks about this in collective teacher efficacy, but it also is collective leader efficacy, it's collective student efficacy. It all depends on the role and responsibilities of folks. But how you team together is setting the conditions where you can co-create your goals. You understand the why behind it. So you've done a root cause analysis to understand the need deeply. You develop a responsibility of shared ownership. You have the agency to take a risk and not fear failure, but it's more of a feedback in the learning cycle. You've created a curiosity landscape and culture where psychologically safe environments are promoting this learn by doing and learn by failure. And I think whether it's a superintendent, assistant sup, principal, assistant principal, or even a teacher leader, when you are in a position to facilitate dialogue, you're always working towards building or co-constructing an understanding of what are we trying to solve, what problem are we trying to address, and what are the needs currently, and then how do our current behaviors, our current practices, our current policies, our current procedures, our current beliefs, like how are those either negatively or positively impacting that need? And what do we either need to replicate and strengthen, or what do we need to let go of? So ultimately, being in the superintendent role, transformational change begins with my own transformation of understanding how do I model the vulnerability? How do I model the curiosity? How do I set the conditions for folks to be themselves vulnerable in those spaces, to disclose their own areas for growth, their own shortcomings of understanding, and just come with a willingness to examine that together collectively and never have the paint dry on a plan when you step into a space when we're going to be really truly about co-creation.
Yeah, fascinating. You really turning unapologetically turning on its head the old school style of leadership and really inviting a new form of that curiosity you've mentioned a number of times. But I think what really speaks to me through what you said is you have to be the one to lead that. And that's, I presume, as a superintendent, one of the hardest things to do, to show that vulnerability when instinctually you might think that a superintendent needs to be this, unfazed individual at the top of the ship, whereas really that's not exactly in reality what it motivates people. Thanks for that. Really great insights, Bruce. Thanks for sharing it. I want to shift to the students within schools in Perris and what you think is the most important thing we can, as educators, do for our kids. And there's obviously a lot of challenges out there, but I'm interested to hear from you. What are the key areas that you think we need to focus on for the student population right now?
Well, I think going through COVID accelerated this awareness for folks, and the psychological safety and the need for belonging is foundational to learning. And if folks don't feel safe in spaces, or they feel like they are just having to fit in, which means they really can't be their true, authentic selves, we know that in neuroscience that the brain gets hijacked. In that amygdala hijacking, students' ability to have critical thinking and the cognitive load necessary for the level of challenge and rigor that classrooms expect in student experiences then gets overwhelmed because of that hijacking. So what we focus on is creating the foundation first. And that means all students feel seen. They know they have a trusted adult. They have spaces in the classroom for self-regulation. They learn about what the tools and skills needed are for that agency, from personal awareness to self-advocacy within our superpowers of our social emotional learning and development within the classroom. Starting and ending classrooms in circle by really connecting with how students are and what they need, and also learning to be empathetic and advocates, not just for themselves, but for each other. This is that shift from bystanding to upstanding to building a community. The collective is always wiser than the self. So how do you build a community that understands each other? And we do that through circles as well. I think the other shift is that there's a theory of action that belonging is the foundation, which leads to then an ability for students to engage. Now, engagement is the determinant to learning, and then the level of rigor and success a student can learn. So if you don't have belonging or engagement, you're never going to get to learning, right? Yep. So if a student is feeling like they don't belong and they're unsafe, you get the emotional outbursts, or you get the amygdala hijack and the brain shutdown. Well, you can't engage then. If I can't engage, then I can't actually put myself in a position to learn, retain, analyze, and be successful in that learning task. And where teachers have shifted the classroom experience from like the givers of knowledge to the designers of learning. And collaboration is a big part of that. So we've shifted our practices in math to be more collaborative. We shifted our practices in our SEL development to be more community and collaborative. and then also in our writing practices as well for our literacy. Our next phase is to really build out this idea of what Anita Archer talks about. We have to pay attention to how many opportunities we're giving children to be able to respond and to elevate their thinking and think aloud. So she has an adage that says everyone does everything. Well, what strategies allow for everyone to do everything? Does hand raising allow everyone to do everything? Or is it just the few kids that get called on that are very confident and competent in that, and other students indirectly get silenced? And then also in that silence, as an instructor, how am I then gauging what they really know? What's the formative assessment happening when I'm not getting a whole class perspective of what they know? So I think those are big kind of mindsets shifts of what's important, because we're still in standardized testing, but that standardized testing era from NCLB in the early 2000s really shifted I think our eye on the prize of what really schooling needed to be all about, right? We shifted everything to be about the single test score, which means curriculum shifted, pedagogy shifted, the assessments changed, policies changed, and even how schools were being rated, exposed, all based on that singular test score. And I think that what we're moving more towards and shifting to is this more about holistic approach, the whole child, and then the multiple data points, not just about a singular test score, but also about their emotional intelligence, about their critical thinking skills, about their ability to navigate circumstances, about their ability to work together in a team.
With test scores and academic outcomes, it's easy to measure performance. You put these kids through a test, you see what the scores are, and then you do that a year later and you can see the difference, right? When we talk about all the other dynamics that go into whole child education, what is the metrics of success? How are you assessing the progression of your students over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah. A lot of different metrics you want to pay attention to, because culture, it eats strategy for lunch, right? So it's the culture you're developing, and it's how our leaders are really the culture setters in our schools. So it's having that confident humility about not having all the answers, and we're going to collectively solve that together. What we're looking for within that whole child experience in the growth metrics are multiple data points. So are kids coming to school more? Easy data point to check,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Do kids in the climate surveys, do they feel more connected to each other, to the school? Do they feel like they have more adults that they trust on campus and they can turn to for any problem? Do we see less referrals coming out of classrooms because of behavioral issues, or because of just needs of kids? Because there's also avoidance strategies for kids that don't want to be in classrooms, and they want to instead hang out in the counseling or the health aid or in the administration, or spend extra time in the bathroom, right? So you're looking at these little indicators that are saying, hey, kids, they love coming to school more. They are building more trust relationships, and they are spending more time in classroom. Then you get into a little bit more granular, the qualitative data of when you start talking to students and you start hearing what they love about their schooling experience. And also a data point for us is how many more students can we put into leadership roles and afford them the opportunity to lead. So we have really multiplied that exponentially across our campuses to have more students take on leadership roles, whether it's being a teacher assistant or tutoring younger kids. So maybe the K-1-2s are working with the students that are 5 and 5th grade and 6th grade, or being in the playground and having older students help monitor around structured activities and support the team play and the more fair play, or it's being ambassadors in classrooms when they have visitors and they're explaining their learning and the learning task and the criteria for success. Whether it's all students that we've shifted from teacher-parent conference nights to student-led conferencing, where students know their goals, know their learning intentions, and know their areas for growth, and have examples of their student work to exemplify that with meaning. And then you see it in the data itself. So what are the markers along the journey of academic performance? And for us, we saw a big gain this past year in reclassification of our English learners. So we see literacy growing faster and accelerating, particularly among our English learners, and they're reclassifying more. Like I said, around behavior, so we've seen a 2/3 decrease in suspensions across all grade levels. And then just the enthusiasm of students wanting to stay after school and be a part of the programs that we're establishing, whether it's through the arts or through the sports, through music, through dance, through the club development. All of those things have definitely grown over the past year as we've been on this initiative. All of those are indicators that kids enjoy coming to school, and that leads to better relationships, better engagement, and ultimately more success.
Yeah, thanks for spelling all that out, because it's, first of all, by the way, 2/3 decrease in suspensions is a pretty astounding statistic. And I know attendance is up all the time at schools, and it's no surprise there. I think the science is there to show that the conditions for learning have to be there in order for a child to succeed. And like what you said, if they're not addressed, it's easy to ignore them and just to plow forward with, well, we're going to give the test, and if they don't succeed, we did our bit. We stood at the front of the classroom and taught the lesson. It is what it is. They're not a good student, or maybe they're not right for school. The harder job is to do exactly what you've just talked about, and to do all that other work and to look at all the other factors that go into a student being able to take in information, process information, and use that. And it takes longer. It's harder. But I believe, anyway, it takes real leadership and steadfast leadership to ignore and resist the pressures that might come to take the quick path and to take the easy path. So I just want to credit you and every other superintendent out there that is doing that hard work.
Thanks, Nick.
In terms of initiatives that's gone on within Perris Elementary School District, are there particular initiatives that you're most proud of over the last few years?
We're focused on all things school. So everything has an initiative. So we launched our SEL Superpowers this year, and that was a joint effort, and it's really unique. I've never seen it done district-wide in this manner, where it was co-created with our staff from the ground up, research-backed, and we developed it and launched it in what we are doing through 6-week coaching cycles of support. And each superpower lines up to a letter in Perris, so PERRIS, 6 letters, 6 SEL superpowers. And those superpowers have just reinforced the importance of the emotional intelligence, the self-regulation, and the sense of belonging and safety that we're reinforcing as foundational. I think ultimately this will be looked back on as really setting the foundation of what is important for all students in their growth and development, of learning more about themselves, ultimately to be self-advocates for their own learning, for their own needs, and self-aware about their own triggers, and then also the skill sets on how to de-escalate that in meaningful ways. So we're teaching into all those pieces to the puzzle. In the past, that's usually been referred out to, kids been referred out, and then supposedly to go get fixed, right? And then sent back to a classroom. And we're really trying to keep kids in classrooms. So all of our classrooms have Zen zones where students can self-regulate and use timers and strategies within those spaces, breathing techniques, literature, squishies, games, things to get them back in place. We're also launching sensory rooms across all of our campuses. And that is this year, where students, if they need a little bit more, they can go through the sensory room. There's about 12 different activities that they go through that helps them get back into their mind-body connection and help regulate that emotional dysregulation. And it's pretty powerful. So it can be used for all kids. Originally, I think it was introduced for kind of a therapeutic method in special education. And then we've really doubled down on our focus on TK through second grade early literacy. So all of our teachers and support staff have been trained in the science of reading, and also in our phonics and phonemic awareness practices with a Haggerty curriculum. And that's a really good example of everyone does everything, because it's a lot of choral responses, a lot of hand movements, and everybody in the classroom gets to participate through that. And we're seeing really great gains in the 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds in that practice. We also saw that less students were in need of intervention this year in third grade than in all years past. So that's another indicator that we're doing things right in that direction. Last year, we started playing around with new math practices, with building thinking classrooms, strategies, and we introduced that to go with the Coalition of the Willing, who wanted to learn. And then we saw some growth in that. So then we started to provide district-wide PD. And now we are in the final stages of math adoption to align to those practices. I think it was really smart for us to go slow in this process, to have folks try on new strategies, because we all have known historically that math, I don't think, was taught in the way that promotes both the idea of complex thinking around math, as well as the idea of taking math beyond the math discipline itself. So I think that's been a big shift for us. And then our after-school program, we've really enhanced with our sports development and our tournaments internally within the district. I think it's been really helpful. And then really harnessing in on the cultural assets and heritage within our community by really supporting the development of our mariachi and folklorico programs. In VAPA this year, we're growing that out. And then just most recently, we are rolling out a new bike program for all of our kinder kids. So all of our kinder students are learning how to ride bikes. That should be rolled out by the end of the year this year, and all schools will have that in full, no pun intended, but gear next year. And then we also launched this year and got planted all of our gardens in every school, so students really understand the cultivation, the patience to bring things to life, and to, I guess, both cherish and reap the rewards through the eating of what you grow. And then the learning, the science behind it, nurturing behind it, the patience behind it, the responsibility behind it, all plays out beyond the garden. The garden is a literal thing, but it's also metaphorically, because it supports all those other aspects in life as we're developing our young people.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of soft skills are being honed by the students within Perris. For all those different diverse opportunities, outdoor activities, enrichment activities, and then you've got your literacy, math, SEL, really touching on a broad spectrum of all the ways education should be for kids. So thanks for bringing us through all of that. It's really impressive, and it's been a pleasure to see, as I've known you for a number of years as a superintendent in Perris, and just seeing, even walking into the lobby of the district and seeing the I don't want to say poster, because that's absolutely not what it is, but the framed artwork and photographs and the logos and the new way Perris School District is put up on the wall, and the colour and the imagination, it all speaks volumes to what you're building there. So thanks for bringing it through. Last question, Bruce, is when, as you look back, or when your tenure is over, whenever that many years from now, what do you hope your district says about your leadership?
Well, I hope they would say that he cared deeply about us and our kids and our community, and it showed in his actions. It showed in how he prioritized his time. It showed in how he prioritized relationships first, and how the kids ultimately were the winners and the families were the winners in the co-construction of the culture that we co-created together, and that our community and our schools are in a better place because we were part of that in a meaningful way, and I helped set the conditions to allow that to occur.
Beautiful. Thanks, Bruce. I think very clear that you care. Well, Bruce, thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership that you're providing to Perris Elementary School District, and all the leadership that you've engaged in throughout your career. I'm sure it's touched many people and had huge rippling effects across the state, both in California and up north. And so thanks for being part of this today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciated it. I enjoyed it as well.
Behind every successful school system is a superintendent making hard decisions, building strong teams, and putting students first every single day. These are the real superheroes shaping the future of education. Follow the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you know someone who would be a great guest, email us at podcast@elevolearning.com. I'm Nick Telford, and this has been another episode of School District Superheroes.